So who here has a podcast? And who has a membership site? Okay, so we got one membership site and podcast. Is anybody? Well, we're going to talk about membership site, but we're going to talk a little bit about monetizing podcasts, which I have a podcast for the rest of us. It's been up about two and a half years. I started last May, and I've always sort of figured out, well, how do you make money at it? Because you spend a lot, if you have a podcast, you spend a lot of time on it, you're giving back, and should you make money on it, which even when I started out, I wasn't even sure I should make money on it, because I was retired, and I'd quit my job, and it somehow seemed not right to be making money again if I was, quote unquote, my narrative was I retired. But over time, you sort of realize that it's probably okay to make money on your podcast. But then you start looking at the numbers. And because one of the questions is, should you monetize or with advertising or your own products or services or both? And sometimes it's sort of either or, but sometimes both make sense. And there was a recent report in Neiman Labs did a report this month on, it was a 5-part series on podcasts. Anybody read that? So Google Neiman Labs and podcasting, and it was probably the most detailed study I've seen of the podcasting industry. But one of the analogies they use, they talk about the newspaper business. And the newspaper business is not sitting there, to some extent they are because their model's changing, but they're not saying, well, should we make money from subscriptions or should we make money from ads? They have reader revenue and they have ad revenue. And so that's kind of, from podcasting, I think it can be both ways. It doesn't have to be either or. But you have to face the statistics of podcasting. This is data from Libsyn. I think Rob Welch puts this together. And I don't host at Libsyn, but I'm going to use their data anyway. And what's fascinating is the median podcast. So right in the middle, half the podcast have downloads per episode is 173. So that's the median. So if you have more than 173 downloads per episode, you're above median. But the standard sort of quote for prices for podcast advertising, I just use $20. And it kind of goes, and that's a really hard number to pin down. And since I don't have advertising in my podcast, currently I can't give a real life experience. But that's what it seems to be, roughly $20 per 1,000 downloads. Now, if you're running a business podcast, I was talking to a podcast network company the other day that approached me. You potentially could get $40 per CTM. But what they don't tell you then, because they sent me a proposal, is $40 per CPM, but that's before their 30% cut. And if there's an advertising agency involved that brought the business to the network, then they get their cut also, which could be as high as 15%. But we're going to use 40, and we're going to assume you have 2 ads per show, so you're getting $40 per 1,000 downloads, which means that if you're median, you make $6.80 per episode. And so when you think about, and sort of the exercise I do when we talk about a membership site is, can I make more money with my membership site than I could with ads? And I'm pretty confident that most of us could make more than what ends up being $6.80 per episode. And so that's sort of the bogey. So you can kind of see where you're at. And and my podcast at this point is about in the top 2%. So I'm looking at $1,100 per episode. I do a weekly episode, and I'm getting feedback. Are you hearing feedback, or is it just me? So I mean, that's roughly $50,000 per year per ads, assuming you can actually get that. And that's kind of the numbers. And then so it's sort of like, could I make $50,000 with my own products and services? And I'll sort of share the journey of how I was able to do that. And I'm still ahead of the race. But now I'm sort of the point where that it's actually more meaningful money. Should I potentially monetize in addition to the membership site? First off, if you have questions, we're going to answer them during the presentation. So interrupt me for questions, because otherwise we'll be out 30 minutes early. Yeah? Thanks. He has the best beard in the entire conference, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. So this is that like the industry standard for advertising? Would I say, okay, I have 500 downloads, so I'm going to charge you $10 for your ad?
No. Where it starts with the CPM. So so you could say, all right, I'm going to charge $30 per 1,000 downloads of my podcast, right? So that's a negotiated rate. It's a negotiation. But then it comes down to, well, how many downloads do you have? So this was I made up the table in the sense that the downloads per episode, the left column and the middle column, that's from Libsyn. So that's the average podcast. And I'm just applying an ad rate to those numbers to figure out, well, how much could you potentially make if you ran ads on your show?
But is there a standard ad rate?
No.
Okay.
I mean, they throw out these numbers of, and if anybody has numbers at the top of their head, because it sort of varies. Like I know the proposal I got from Audio Boom, they said $5 for pre-rolls for the CPM. And Audio Boom's like a UK-based network. And they were saying, they quoted me $30 for the mid-roll. So that would be $35 per episode. And I think post-roll was another $5. So it was $40, which is basically what I'm saying here. I'm saying 2 ads at $20, so $40.
For 1,000 downloads.
For 1,000 downloads, right, yeah.
As a fan, I'm speaking after you a little bit on monetization.
Uh-huh.
I have experience with sponsorship. Sponsors don't know 100% how to treat podcasting. So like focusing on what's industry standard is just gonna hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
Be willing to negotiate and be willing to maybe ask for a little bit more and be negotiated down when you're talking to sponsors.
Exactly, which was it was a great,
Yeah.
Jeff Brown, if I don't know if you went to, his session was the one right before lunch in this room. He talked about that because he gave the example of FreshBooks approached a number of podcasters about, we'd like to sponsor your show. And the response of all the other podcasters was, great, how would we go about doing that, right? Whereas Jeff says, great, here's how I work with sponsors. I do a 6-month package, and so he took control of negotiation, which is the approach. If I decide to do sponsors, that's what I'm going to do, because and sometimes as podcasters, and I've struggled with this. This is a business, and I've run businesses before, and I've sold businesses, but podcasting always seemed like a hobby, and sometimes I have to put my business hat on and say, well, it is a negotiation, and I want to do what's good for my listeners in terms of a sponsorship, and do good for the work that we do as podcasters. Other questions before we go on? So one of the interesting things that has intrigued me about what's going on now, and you can read it in that Neiman report, is before you sort of had your ad in your show, and then that was it, right? It lived on forever. Now there's these new technologies. Art19 is one that I think Midroll is working with. Megaphone, I got a call next week with, how do you say that, Panoply? I think it's Panoply. They're the Slate magazine one. I need to learn how to say their company before. Does anybody do that podcast? Like you're doing a podcast episode, and you've written out maybe a script, and you actually have no idea how to say the name. So I'm always looking up on YouTube, how do you pronounce things? It's very helpful. So we're going to go with Panoply. But Megaphone's another example. But the idea is you can actually insert an ad, even a live read ad, into all your back episodes, which is, to me, is kind of intriguing, because I actually find ads on podcasts somewhat annoying, but if I could do something creative and change it all the time, then it might make some sense. So that's something that's just developing, and they're estimating that potentially 90% of ads could be this technology in 2016. So I mean, this is something fairly new. So it's something to consider. So, but I launched my podcast. I'd gone for about 5 months, and I thought I maybe should make some money on this, and I decided that, what's your thing? I'll launch a course. And I studied all about Udemy, and I saw these people making thousands and thousands of dollars on Udemy. So I recorded this course. I did Learn to Invest in 7 Steps. What Udemy doesn't tell you is if you set your course at $97, you can choose if you want a discount or not, offer it. Well, they were selling this thing for like $5 or $6. And so I launched this course. It was like 3 hours. And I have here's the grand total of how much I've made on Udemy. This is incredible to me. I have a 3-figure business on Udemy. Right? I've made lifetime earnings at Udemy, $290. And I make about $20 a month, and they just put it in my account. But this was kind of disappointing. And this is a thing, I'm always worried, and I'm worried about giving a talk like this because they always put out the example of the person, the man or woman that made thousands, incredibly successful. Well, I learned with Udemy, this was a great example. Those who are making so much money on Udemy had handpicked and were promoting. And the guy that was making the most money was a guy teaching other people how to make money on Udemy. So I followed everything he did, and I did the free coupons, and that's what it's been. And so that was sort of a disappointment. Now, and I'm sure there's ways to do Udemy correctly, but I'm one person, and we sort of figure this out, and everything's an experiment, and it failed in my mind, although I did get the course. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, it says 92 students enrolled. That kind of translates to like $3.
Right.
What is the enrollment?
See, what you're supposed to do, at least this is what I was told you're supposed to do, is I had like 60 or 70 free coupons. So this was the number. You wanted to get as many ratings as you want, said the experts, and get as many students as you want. And then the idea was that people would notice it. And the experiment was to figure out, could you get organic search traffic from Udemy? If somebody searched how to invest, does my course pop up? And at the time I did this was in 2014, there weren't that many courses in investing. So I thought this should be pretty easy. Now I promoted the course on my show, and I sent people to Udemy, and I gave a lot of free coupons. But yeah, now I think the average sale for this course is $15. That's because you can set your price, and I could say don't discount it at all, but then because the thing about the Udemy structure is people expect a discount, which is the benefit of a membership site is you can control, because this is out on their platform, and I technically don't think I could take this course down because people bought lifetime access to it. So it just sits on Udemy making me $20 a month, and which is a three-figure business, which isn't very good. But so after that, I decided to launch this membership site. This was my third membership site. I quit my job I was an investment manager, so I managed money mostly for endowments and foundations. So I was in my mid-40s. I retired, but I retired because I had spent 15 years building a partnership, and I always had to say we. No, we think this. So I was our firm's chief investment strategist, but I would still say we, even though it was me, because we were partners. And so I quit my job, and I just wanted to say me. Now, I think this. And so I built a membership site in 2012, and had a great time. It was based on WordPress. I'd used sort of a wish list member type offshoot, and I had Infusionsoft, and I had fun building it. I launched it on the plane after quitting my job. So I'm flying back from Ohio to Idaho. I launched my site, my first blog post, and then I was terrified somebody would actually hire me because I went 3 weeks, maybe a month, and I shut it down. And fortunately nobody joined because I found out that it's like, I just like building the membership site, but the actual idea of doing what I'd done for 15 years just wasn't satisfying because now I was doing what I was doing before, but for free, as opposed to getting paid very well. So when you talk about doing a membership site, this is a long-term commitment. So make sure you're doing something you enjoy doing. Don't do a membership site because it's the topic of the month. Do something that you want to do. So I shut that one down in 2012, and then I took about 8 months off, and I thought, I'm going to build a robo-advisor made out of rubber bands and sticks because I knew how to build a membership site now. I knew how to do Infusionsoft. I re-registered it as an investment advisor, and I just would have people fill out the questionnaire, and I would tell them what model portfolio to go in because I had run model portfolios before, and which is all Betterment is. They just had better technology than I did, but the website looks the same. And so I spent 4 or 5 months doing that, and I launched that in April of 2013. And I made it a month, and I shut it down again because I decided I didn't want to give specific advice. And so it took me a while to figure out what to do. So finally, I launched this December 2013. December 2014. I started podcasting, and by then, I realized I could probably give education. And I need to reiterate that. Make sure your membership site, because people are joining, it's something you want to do. And it's taking me a long time to actually provide what my members want, because I had done it before, and frankly, I was scared. I just didn't, there's a lot of stress to managing money, and I was having fun not having any stress. So I run my site on Rainmaker. We're going to talk a little bit about statistics here, but there's a form, and I'll show you some examples of that. But this was in August, so I had, over the life of my membership site, 606 members. And I have only, was anybody here in Chris Ducker's course this morning? A couple, all right. So he went through his entire launch process and the build up, he was making an event. I launched by mentioning I have this site now called the Money for the Rest of Us Hub on a podcast episode. I mean, that was my launch. There was no build up because I just wanted to see if it would work. I wanted to see if the credit card thing would work, because the scariest thing about membership site that I learned in 2012 is the technology is iffy. I had 4 or 5 different parts together, and it's iffy, and now it's a little better than iffy, but still not great, in my opinion. I mean, I like Rainmaker. I'm going to their conference next month. Rainmaker was started by the copy blogger folks, and it was supposed to be this all-in-one package, and I'd give it a B. I'd give it a B. I mean, I still, and we'll go through some of the numbers, but it gets a B. So right now, this is of August, there's 411 members. This is what I focus on, because the key to a membership site is to get new members, but to retain old ones. And I'm going to show you how to do the math of this. My retention rate is 95%, which means I lose 5% of my members every month. So if I have 400 members, I have basically 15 to 20 members quitting every month. And Chris mentioned this morning. That feels awful when somebody quits. When I was an investment advisor, our typical client was paying us $50,000 to $100,000 a year. And when you got a call that somebody was firing you, you felt awful, because 1, you were getting a pay cut, and 2, that means they didn't like you anymore and wanted to move on. I mean, you just take it personally. So I launched this site, and when somebody quit, I was programmed just like a $50,000 client had quit. It felt the exact same. It really did. And so if you're going to do a membership site, you have to realize it is sort of a numbers game, and people quit. And as Chris says, don't take it personally, but and he admits he takes it personally, and it's hard to do. But that's just part of the challenge. So in terms of, we're going to go through this number because there's a little bit of a challenge with my membership site right now. So success, as I mentioned, is growth plus retention. You have to focus on both sides of the equation. How do you get new members in, but how do you keep them from staying? So there'll be copies of this slide. Seems like Philip's giving them away. I mean, I pre-gave them, so you should be able to get copies, or you can take a picture. But here is how you calculate retention rate. And it took me a while to figure this out, because everybody talked about churn, and I just couldn't get any good numbers on it. But basically, you're looking at your end customers at the end of the month minus the new customers that you brought on during the month, and you divide it by your starting customers. And this is important because we're going to try to figure out, what is the lifetime value of a customer? How long do they stay? If you're charging $20 a month and they stay for 10 months, then their value is $200. And that's important in order to decide, well, do I run ads to go into my membership site or not, if you decide not to do it through your podcast? So, I mean, here's just a numerical example. This was an example through part of August. So this is like 3 weeks in, 22 new customers, and I think I ended up losing 15 or so. And which is the other thing about membership sites. It's just, you bring in one customer at a time. This is not something where, at least how I do it, and maybe I don't do it right, you're bringing in 10, 20 clients a day, right? On average, I get about 1 new client a day. And it's completely random, and I've tried to figure it out. And so if I go 5 days and nobody's joined my site, I think it's broken, because it's possible that it's broken. But randomness means that it's clumpy, right? Sometimes you might have 3 people join. You might go 5 days and nobody joins, but it's 1 member at a time, and that becomes very important in terms of marketing how do you get people to join? Because the person joining, they're making the decision to pay you, and so when you court them or help them out, it's just one sale at a time. So these are not big numbers, but collectively at 400, 400 members, I offer a monthly subscription rate and I offer annual. And if I have about half the people join on about 50 to 60% join the annual, which means basically you get a year's worth of income in 1 month. And so that tends to compound. And so, my site has done, typically, and I'm averaging about $8,000 to $9,000 a month. Probably do 7. So this is not big. I mean, it is a lot of money when you think about it. On the other hand, you're comparing it to what could you earn if you ran ads, and that's sort of the comparison. Chris mentioned it's very, very long term. It's like a flywheel. A flywheel, apparently, has anybody seen a flywheel? Tom, you have?
Well, they're on lots of things.
They are.
Yeah.
Like
a old lawnmower.
Oh, okay. Well, you can see how mechanically inclined I am. But it takes a while to get them started, but once they get going, then it works. And they talk about this predictable income with a membership site. And there is some truth to that. All 400 members of my site are not going to quit this month. And I have done this enough that generally it's about 5% quit. So that's somewhat predictable. And the key is to get more numbers or more members in. But one of the challenges, my funnel is from my podcast. So my podcast gets roughly 25 to 30,000 listens per episode. And so you have 400 members, 600 over the life. That's about 1.5% of members if I'm doing of the listener that joined the site. And that's probably, I think it might be hard to get more than 2 to 3% of your listeners to join your membership site. Maybe I'm off base. But the idea is it's a slow process. But at this point, the death of a membership site is you have more members quitting than joining. And I had a great growth up until summer, and then suddenly I'm adding like 10 net new members a month, and that's the other way to sort of measure. What is your net new membership every month? Now, hopefully it's growing, but if it's not, then there's potentially a challenge. So what is it that it takes to be successful? It's real, we're going to go over these 5 things. So, one member at a time, the member archetype helps solve their biggest challenge, lead them on a pathway to success and keep learning so you can keep teaching. So we'll go over each of those. One member at a time. Now, I've built my site by answering, when I started my podcast, when people would write me, I would write them back, which seemed logical because of my business career. When people would write me an email, I would write them back. But it turns out maybe that's not how the world works anymore, because now when somebody will get my podcast, they'll listen to all 120 episodes, sometimes over a period of a few weeks. They'll binge list, and they'll write me an email. And they'll say, I love your show. This is great. They might have a question. I'm going to write them back. And I've tracked it because, that's what you do in business. You track it. And what's fascinating about it is I don't get that many emails. When I was an investment advisor, I'd get 150 emails a day. I average about 2 emails a day from listeners or members. And as podcasters, write them back, because that's who ends up joining my site. Because and maybe as podcasters you've had this experience. Their idea is they think that you're up here. In fact, I talked to a listener yesterday that says, I've never written you because I figured you were so busy you would never write me back. But if you write them back, suddenly you're their hero, because they've just spent 100 hours listening to you in their earbuds, and then they wrote you, and you wrote them back. And suddenly they like you, they already trust you, they just don't know if you're a real person. And suddenly you write them back and you address their concern, then that helps you get their members. So when we talk about one member at a time, that's what it means. That means writing people back when they write you. I've had my phone number on my website for 2.5 years. And I was shocked because some kid, recent college graduate in Chicago, called me on the phone, and he had a question. And I called him back, and I answered his career question. I've had one phone call in 2 years of podcasting with my phone number on my website. And I said, well, why'd you call me? Well, because I had a question, and I figured if you put your phone number, you probably would answer it. And I did. So that's first. So it's one member at a time. It's one sale at a time, and that's what it takes. One sale at a time, one member at a time. So then it comes the question of, who is your target audience? And I didn't do a survey to figure that out, but there's some people that like your podcast, there's some people that don't. Your target audience chooses you. And if you're running a membership site, they'll choose you. And so it's helpful to actually survey your audience, which I did. So these numbers are really small. But my audience it's about 60% have postgraduate degrees, which is a very different audience than, and any of you know Andrew from Listen Money Matters. He has a very similar show. That's not his audience, right? It's a very different audience. So we talk about ads or membership sites, you have to target your audience. So, about 90% have some type of college degree, and they tend to skew very, very wealthy. Well, not very, very wealthy, but about 20% have between $1 million and $5 million in assets. And so the vast majority have several $100,000. Now, that's not all the audience, but if I'm going to do a membership site and I'm only going to get 1% that join, then what I offer should be applicable to them. Now, the question is, what do we offer them? So I asked. And I got this from Pat Flynn. My son Brett and I is here. We were in Yellowstone National Park hiking about a year ago. And I was we were in the tent, and I was listening to the podcast, and there was this question. They had a guest whose name I forget. But he said, ask your audiences, what is your single biggest challenge right now when it comes to money investing? Or whatever your business is. What's your single biggest challenge? So I asked that question, and people answered. And it's like, well, their biggest challenge was things like this. Asset allocation and diversification. Trying to figure out reports of doom and gloom versus earning a reasonable return. Figuring out all the information out there. I'm overwhelmed. There's so much stuff on there. What do I do? My biggest challenge is confidence, figuring out where to invest my money. And the way that this particular, on that interview, they said whoever wrote the most, so you sort by length of response. So if you survey your audience, look at who wrote the most, because they're the ones that probably have the biggest challenge. And so those are some things I did. And so I launched a site that I launched in December. I had 3 pricing tiers. I do a premium podcast episode, and I had a middle tier that I think was going to do audio and visual lessons, and then I had You Got Everything for $19.95 a month. And I launched it, and in the first 3 days, everybody joined the highest price tier. And so I immediately took down the other 2 tiers, and I thought, well, I don't want to try to have 3 different tiers. So simple was better, and so I just focused on the highest price tier. And then some member, 3 months in, says, how come you don't offer an annual option? Because I only offered monthly. And that's what I did. So I offered an annual, and it turned out it worked. And so when you're launching a site, it's iterative. What I have now is very different than what I started with, because I got member feedback, and they said, why don't you do an annual plan, or why are you doing this? And so it's very, very iterative. Third thing then is, and it took me a while to learn this. I thought people were paying me for content. And so I'm going to produce content. I was I had the regular podcast episode. I did what I call a plus episode. I was adding a separate audio lesson, potentially a video every week. And I was doing a monthly, what I call an investment strategy report, or my investment conditions report. And I was profiling any changes I made to my investment portfolio. So that's what I launched with. And it was overwhelming to people. Because what people were trying to do is they're trying to solve a problem, and I was producing content because I thought they were paying me for content. No, they were paying me because they wanted to solve their biggest problem, which turned out to be, where should I invest at, and how do I better manage my emotions investing? And so 6 months in, actually 9 months in, I kind of changed it around, and I started focusing on those problems even better. And so instead of trying to produce courses, I tried to start solving problems. So now I have model portfolios on my site. I have specific asset allocation tools, and things like that. And it was all based on member feedback. And so don't feel like you have to put all this content. In fact, the less content, if it actually solves their problem, if you've asked them what their biggest challenge is, if you can solve that in a smaller package, people actually will stay longer because they don't feel so overwhelmed. So this is an example, and this is on Rainmaker. You can do what's called a learning management system. And so most of my Keystone content is just here. It's asset allocation tools and some things that people, and it's organized by modules. Now, I didn't custom design my own site. I mean, I used a theme, and I did this all myself. And that's the other thing is Chris Ducker was talking about having 3 people. Somebody said, how many people do you need to run your membership site? I think he had 3 people. I have 1 part-time person, although I did hire Brett to do some data entry this month for an app that we're launching. But other than that, I mean, this is a part-time 30. Tom, one of my members, was saying, well, how often do you work, right? I mean, and it's probably, I spend about 30 hours a week on the podcast and on the membership site. And surprising, because my other fear is everybody's going to have technical issues. And how am I going to solve that? And with something like Rainmaker, if they lose their passwords, it's automatic. I have about 1 client issue a month when it comes to somebody can't get their thing to work. And this month was the worst one because there was a member who had the password. And I go in, because I go in, and so I set the new password, and I know what it is, and I know the username, and I go in on myself, on my phone, on Safari, and I can sign in just fine, and she's convinced that she can, for whatever reason, she can't get in, and she's cleared her cache, she's tried her friend's phone, and I don't know what to do in that situation, because I can sign in fine on 3 different devices, and she's tried 3 different devices and can't sign in. And so what did I do? I said, well, here's a free membership, and see if you can sign in and start all over, and she was apparently able to get in with a free membership. But sometimes when you want a membership site, if they run into too many headaches, just give them a free membership, and because you don't have all day to solve problems like that. Because somebody told me 95% it's user error. But if they're on that side of the world and you're here, you're not going to convince them that potentially it's a user error. So the idea here is you're going to lead your members on a pathway to success. And I sort of reiterated, it's not about the content. It's like, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. And I've set up my site like that. Step 1 is to set your portfolio plan. Step 2 is to manage your motion. And step 3 is to get your questions answered. And I did not do this at first. Because your idea is to keep people in. And so having some type of email series after they join, and I don't know why I didn't think about this. I just figured people would join. So it was like 6 months in, I closed my site down for 3 months to new members so I could build an email series for an onboarding process. Because that's important, because they get lost and they want to know, and then you just have to point out the right content to them. So kind of lead them on that pathway to success. And this was the example. So those are the 3 things. So you got some pathway so they have this journey. Now, if you're in the finance space, and what I like about it is in reality, when you talk about their biggest challenge, it's never solved. I mean, they can solve it temporarily, so they set their plan, but what do they do next week when the markets change or something changes? And so I like sort of the time decay from that aspect. Any other questions at this point? Okay, Roger.
How much of it, from a retention, and maybe it's too early in the journey, is the community aspect? Do they talk?
In my site, very little, which was, I didn't launch, when we talk about an incremental approach, I went 6 months before I launched a forum with my site because I figured that, well, if I don't have very many members, who are they going to talk to? And they weren't really joining for the forum. Chris's site, that was a key component of his site, the community. So I've had the forum running for probably about a year now, and I get maybe 3, 4 posts, and most of them, they're asking me questions. Because see, I am not a registered investment advisor. And as I've talked to attorneys and listened to, well, watch how Dave Ramsey, so people call Dave Ramsey on the phone, right? And he gives very specific advice in a public setting. And so my process is, as long as it's me to many, then I can get away with it. And that's sort of the advice I got from a securities attorney. And so people email me, a member, and say, what about this? And they might mention a specific ETF. And I say, well, go post that in the forum, or I'll address it in this week's Plus episode. I don't ever put a security ticker symbol or anything in an email, just because I don't want to get shut down by the SEC. So that was, yeah, another question.
Do you do a combination of your pathway email versus specific like the Brexit or certain milestones that happen on a day-to-day basis, so they feel like they're getting up-to-date information?
Well, I present, so I do a monthly strategy. So at the beginning of the month, I do what's called an investment conditions report. So I show them valuations, economic trends, and so, but that's like on a monthly basis. So you don't have to put something up every day by any means, if I'm understanding your question correctly. No, in fact, I put up probably maybe a new content once a week. I mean, I always do the Plus episode because it's kind of a companion episode, and which, talk about mistakes you make, right? Because you have to prepare what your audience wants, your listeners want. And it became pretty clear to me, if you're using your podcast as your vehicle to bring in members, they're audio-centric. They want audio. And they want audio as convenient as a podcast. And so what I found is, well, how do I do that? They don't want to be typing in their password to get audio. And so I said, all right, we're going to have a secret feed, RSS feed for the Plus episodes. And that worked fine. And I just took the risk. I mean, some content you got to give for free. So if somebody quits the site, they can still get my Plus episodes. Well, lo and behold, in May, the iTunes approved my premium podcast episode for the iTunes store. And like 4 things, I only had 4 episodes. Everything supposedly was blocked in Rainmaker. But it turns out with the latest iTunes update, if you search Money for the Rest of Us Plus, you can download every episode of my premium podcast that's on my site. And so now I actually have I have more people listening to that paid episode than I have members of my site, which is somewhat of a business problem, which is why I'm going to launch an app. So I'll shut that down. But the idea is that listen to your members, see what they want and the type of content they want, and in the format they want, because that's something you have to realize. If you're doing a membership site of primarily podcast listeners, maybe they're like to participate in forum, but they just like to listen to stuff. And I only do 1 show a week. So the idea was, when we talk about advertising, maybe if you do 5 shows a week, the numbers work out. I mean, John Lee Dumas, right? His per episode listens is from what I can figure is about 30,000 episodes, or 30,000 listeners per episode. But he does 7 shows a week, and so he can make hundreds of thousands of dollars because there's so many episodes. My approach was, I'm going to do 1 episode a week, and then if people want additional content, then they'll pay for it. And that's sort of the approach I've used. And so if you're talking about should you do your own product or ads, if you're going to do ads, it's probably better to do more than 1 episode a week, because then you're going to get more downloads. And that's just how the numbers work. Other questions? Yeah.
Just can you clarify, you may have already said it, but it's Saturday, so my brain's not working through. You charge for your membership, charges for your podcasting content, if I could.
No. So the podcast is free, so Money for the Rest of Us.
Okay.
I charge for a membership site that includes additional premium audio content. So it includes a special, basically a Q&A podcast episode called a Plus episode.
So you run 2 podcasts, basically?
Yeah, and then I run additional audio. I have some video, some courses on there and things like that. But at this point, I'm not even adding new audio lessons. And I rarely add a video. I do the premium podcast episode, and I do 2 investment strategy reports a month, audio. The one's written and it has an audio component to it.
I'm just trying to think of where do you draw the line between what you give away free and what you charge for?
The only thing I give for free on purpose is the podcast. right?
Content-wise, you know, you have a lot of knowledge, right? So how do you say, well, I'm not going to share this on my podcast because that's something.
Well, when we talk about how I do it, that's where time decay helps, right? So one of my vehicles was to do webinars. So I have an email list for my podcast, and if you have a podcast, having an email list is very helpful, and it's called The Insider's Guide. There's roughly 4,000 to 5,000 people on that email list, and I'll do invites to a webinar where I'll answer questions, and I'll basically share my current views that's on the membership site, and I'll give it all away for free. Not access to the site, but in the presentation, I'm sharing what my current thoughts are, what markets are, et cetera, because it's no good a month from now or 2 months from now. And so that's sort of how you weigh. So it's always, and from what I've heard, is giving away more for free is actually better because the experts are going to want help anyway. They're going to want the hand-holding. So even if you give most of it away for free, even if there's not time decay, they're going to want the help. And those that want help will be willing to pay. Because I've gotten feedback. So I charge $20 a month or $199 a year. I get feedback from members that say, you are way, way undercharging for this. And then I have members that say, I can't afford that. I just don't find the value. And you're going to get the spectrum. And so when you talk about finding your tribe, you know, my tribe is the people that have enough money that they're willing to pay $200 to have somebody help them in terms of education. And so that just sort of, they select you. Now, some people will join for a month and quit just to see what it's like, but that's kind of how you do it. Yeah?
You said earlier that you used Wishlist and now Rainmaker and both are integrated with Infusionsoft, right?
Well, at the time, Wishlist actually wasn't. Surprisingly, it is now. So I use some third-party thing that it was like one guy in his basement running it.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that's changed with membership sites is I use Stripe. And Stripe is I'm sure Stripe is now integrated with Wishlist. But when I did it in 2012, which wasn't that long, it's like 4 years ago, you needed a merchant account, you needed a shopping cart, there's like 4 pieces that had to talk together, and you had to attest and take courses to say that you were PCI compliant. Now Stripe does all that. And I don't take PayPal, because that was like an extra step. I'm one person, right? I figure if somebody's paying $200, they can pull out a credit card. I don't need to deal with PayPal. So
what was the big advantage for Rainmaker? You said we'd give it a B.
I didn't know of any other choices. I like the idea of one stop, but when I show you what I use now, because it works in the sense that they handle what I didn't like about Wishlist Member at the time is the login page didn't look like my site, and the shopping cart wasn't my site. Rainmaker will put the SSL certificate for you, and I didn't have to deal with it. I tried doing that once, and I was successful, but it took 3 days to get the SSL certificate installed. So they do all that. They have a support, but they don't do everything that I would like it to do. And that's always a trade-off, right? You can custom design it. Kirk, I don't think he's here. He's custom designed his membership site that he's going to deliver a course, and he paid $2,500. So, which, isn't bad. I'm paying, I think, $79 a month for Rainmaker for the one site. And I think there might be a little higher now. So that's why, because I didn't know any other choices, and I liked the all-in-one. But they're fine. They're fine. But I don't think there's any perfect solution. So, yeah.
I know you repeated multiple times and I reiterated, but I'm still trying to understand exactly what you mean by time decay helps. What do we mean by that?
What I mean is, so somebody wants a piece of knowledge, they get the knowledge, but in a month that knowledge is no longer useful. Okay. So in the financial markets, knowing what to do with your portfolio today is not necessarily what you should be doing a year from now. And so for example, I have a subscription to Ned Davis Research. I pay them $25,000 a year. This is my primary research platform, so they get all the data I need. And I've been with them for 12 years. Because if I quit, I no longer have current information that I need. And so that's what I mean by time decay. So if you have a product where a membership site in my mind doesn't work as well as if the challenge is solved in 3 months, and then they can move on, because then you always have to find new members. Because the idea is, my average member stays 10 months or more. So it's a pretty extensive, and actually longer. And so one way to get them to stay longer is they continue to need you. Now, many membership sites, the community is what keeps them there. They've solved the initial problem, but now they just like the community. In my case, there's not a big community element. There's a little bit, but not great. They're staying because they want the information, because markets change, so they need the help. If that makes sense.
So just to make sure I understood it, I guess you're saying that helps with the generation of content that is relevant at time.
Oh yeah, it gives me something to write about too. Exactly.
You basically never run out of stuff.
No.
Right.
And help with retention.
Right.
Well, yeah, it helps.
Want to make sure I got.
Yeah, that's good clarification. Yeah.
Do you set boundaries on your expertise? Like if somebody asks a question about driverless cars or biometric stuff where you're not an expert, you just say that's not my domain. I only do gold, silver commodities, or I only do X, which is my.
So yeah, he's asking, do I set boundaries on the knowledge that I share? If somebody asks about something I don't know about, I typically just make something up and no. No, if I don't know, I say I don't know. I don't know, or I don't do that, or I might not even want to do that, right? I mean, I could learn, but it's not. I don't do, and that's important with a membership site, because when you talk about attracting your members, okay, I'm not a trader, so on my sales page, I'm very explicit. My typical member is a long-term, primarily buy and hold investor, primarily ETFs, but doesn't want to ride the market down when it falls 50%. So we're looking to avoid huge drawdowns, and they just want some hand-holding and some help. And so I don't, short-term traders, I don't want them, and if they join, they end up quitting because that's not what I do. I've had people say, well, I don't get enough investment ideas from you. Well, that's fine, because I don't have that many investment ideas, because this is how I invest. I mean, I'm not going to change that. Okay, so we're about done, and I don't think I have that many slides anyway, so. Oh yeah, this is more nuts and bolts. So there's the pricing. So about 2/3 is annual. So here's what I'm using now. So I use Rainmaker, but I didn't completely trust Rainmaker, so I store all my audio and visual. My audio goes on Amazon Web Services, as well as my files are in S3 buckets. Videos on Vimeo. I mentioned Stripe is my payment processor. I use Infusionsoft for my email. I used to use Aweber, but now I use Infusionsoft. I keep track of all my people that write me about my podcast in Highrise, which is like $20 a month. I use Lead Pages. And then you talk about member-driven content. Where did it go? So this is my latest thing. So my members want the convenience, so I'm launching an app. It's a little terrifying because I've never developed an app. So hopefully it will work. But that's kind of where that's going. And what else do we have? So this is my funnel. I mean, I have my podcast. They join my email list. I haven't actually done a webinar since May. Anybody met John Corcoran? He's been going around. He's a real big networker. He's done 83 webinars in the past year. And he says, well, here's how you build it. You leverage somebody else's audience, and you do a joint webinar with them. I did 83 last year, and I said, that would drive me nuts. That would be so boring. And so I'd done one since May because it's the summer, and who wants to do webinars during the summer? The other thing that I do now is that 7 Steps course is on money for the rest of us. So people can sign up for that for free. Because if Udemy is going to sell it for $5, I might as well make it free. And so I'm getting people, they join that. So I have about 200 people that have joined that course. And then I have a follow-up email series. And the last email shows them, kind of introduces them to my membership site, the Money for the Rest of Us Hub. And that seems to be converting at about 10%, so that's good. When I did this slide, I thought, well, I'm going to run Facebook ads because everybody knows that is the way you make money in online business. And so I tested my first ad for 3 days. And I did 4. And the idea was, here's a short little video. Get this free course. Learn to invest in 7 steps. I had one person. So I paid $80 for one. Because the numbers are supposed to work. Well, how much does it cost to get one person to join just for free? So $80 for my one lead. And so if I spent 100 and whatever, well, let me do the math there. $800, I'll get 10 leads. And so if I can get 10% of those to join, that would, the numbers don't work. But that's sort of how you're trying to figure out what does it cost to get a lead versus your lifetime membership, which goes back to why the retention rate is very, very important, to figure out what's the average customer value. In my case, it's several $100s, $200 to $300. And so that's kind of how you do. So I don't know how to do ads, apparently. But I'll still, it's all an experiment. And part of it, I don't like to do ads because I don't like being tracked all over the internet. If I really wanted to do it well, if somebody showed up at moneyfortherestofus.net, you can track them and show those people Facebook ads. But I don't like to do that, and so it's probably why I'm not a great online marketer. But I'm not trying to make a 7-figure business. All I'm trying to do is monetize my podcast a little bit, and that's working. That's about it. Now, let's go with some other questions until we throw us out, but nobody seems to be. Yeah.
Can you go back to that page where you listed all of the services?
Yeah. And it turns out that that's not all of them, because my app was based on, the idea was to use Infusionsoft as the API. So because people put their email into the app, it needs to see whether they're a member or not. Rainmaker doesn't have an API, so there isn't anywhere to figure out. So now I'm using Drip for the app, so I got another one there.
And how much do you estimate, could you give me like an annual or a monthly estimate of how much those services all cost you to run your business?
Rainmaker is what? I'm going monthly here.
Okay.
So Rainmaker is $80. Amazon Web Services, I have all my files. It's about $5. So we're up to, what, $85. Vimeo is $10 a month. So $90. Stripe's free. Stripe charges $30 or $30 cents per transaction, plus I think 3%. Fusionsoft's a little pricey. I'm up to like $400 a month. I didn't know this. Once you get over 5,000 subscribers, suddenly you're at $379 a month. But I've used it for 4 years, and it's like, well, I'll eat that. But ConvertKit potentially. Running an email thing is hard. I mean, even ConvertKit. And ConvertKit was sort of the flavor of the month, the best option out there. But even the last month, they've had issue in terms of deliverability. It is hard to run an email system. So that's Infusionsoft, but you can get a cheaper option there. High-Rise is $29 a month. You adding this up? Because I'm just throwing out numbers. Good. Lead Pages, I think, is $20. And then I signed up for Lead Pages Center to sort of get the pieces to talk together. So I mean, all my business costs, what, $600-700 a month? $519. Good job. In revenue of $7,000 to $9,000 a month. So I mean, it's in one person. So I don't pay anybody except for Brett to load data from my app. Although he might be doing YouTube for me, so we'll see. Other questions, because we're just about out of time. Yeah.
Just in general, if you're pretty not a very comfortable person talking on podcasts, how do you get sort of started on that? Like how to actually create the podcast content?
Oh, how did I get started?
Yeah, just in general.
Well, in my case.
Is there a thought leader there or someone that?
Oh, a thought leader? Yeah, not me. The who?
Pat Flynn.
Pat Flynn.
Pat has a free tutorial on his website, SmartCast Video.
Doing podcasting?
Yeah, John Lee Dumas has one. Cliff Ravencraft. I mean, there's people out there that do it, and it is the best vehicle I know to gain trust from people. Because the problem with people scan when they read, so they forget most of it. People can only sit and watch a video for 3 minutes, maybe. But because they're exercising or driving, they'll listen to you for 30. My shows are 25 minutes long. and they're not interviewed. The other thing is, when I started doing the podcast, I wanted people to hire me, right? And if I knew enough, then I can do a 25-minute shows because I've spent years talking to boards and stuff, and that's what I did for me. So, great. Well, thank you for joining.